Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe. In the red glow of neon reflections on rain-soaked pavement, the marquee of the Paragon Theater flickered against a murky night sky. The air was thick with anticipation and a whisper of dread, like the soft rustle of secrets waiting to be unearthed. Edmund Corvin, known to most simply as the Illusionist, prepared for his final act. A performance promised to be as unforgettable as it was enigmatic. Inside the cavernous theater, shadows danced across faded murals and stained seats. The lobby was hushed, the quiet punctuated only by the steady drip of condensation and the soft hum of muted conversations. Corvin moved through the corridors with measured steps, his tailored suit immaculate despite the oppressive darkness outside. He had always been a master of command, the man who could make reality bend in ways no one ever thought possible. Tonight, that control would be put to the ultimate test. The audience gathered in clusters, their murmurs blending with the sound of distant thunderstorms. Among them was Lena Reyes, a seasoned journalist whose keen gaze had followed Corvin's career for years. Lena wasn't merely drawn by his allure. Her instincts told her there was something far more sinister lurking beneath the polished veneer of his magic. Her notebook lay open in her lap, waiting to capture every nuance of the evening's unfolding mystery. As the lights dimmed, a palpable silence fell. A single spotlight cut through the darkness, tracing Corvin's determined stride toward the center of the stage. The stage itself, adorned with intricate carvings and fading velvet drapes, seemed to breathe with a life of its own. From the audience, a mix of apprehension and excitement hung in the charged air. Corvin began with an array of classical illusions, sleight of hand and mind-bending misdirections that defied logic. His movements were fluid, each gesture calculated to distract and disarm. The audience's eyes widened in wonder as cards appeared and disappeared, and coins melted into thin air. But beneath the surface of these well-practiced tricks lay a darker purpose. Corvin's eyes, cold and analytical, occasionally flickered toward a heavy ancient trunk that sat inconspicuously off-stage. It was a prop, a relic from his early, more troubled career, yet it bore an aura of significance he never openly acknowledged. In the midst of the show, a sudden, unexplained glitch unsettled the evening. One of the volunteers, a stoic man whose name Lena recognized from obscure police reports, vanished as if swallowed by the very shadows. His disappearance was so swift and meticulous that the audience hesitated, a collective murmur of disbelief rippling through the theater. Corvin's face remained expressionless, his demeanor as composed as ever. But Lena noticed a subtle change, a glimpse of something like regret or resolve in his eyes. After the show, as the theater emptied into the velvet night, Detective Robert Manning lingered by the stage door. Manning was a man scarred by years of chasing elusive figures who operated in the gray margins of morality. His own history of personal loss and professional compromise made him a reluctant but relentless seeker of truth. Manning had been tracking Corvin for months, piecing together patterns that hinted at a far broader conspiracy than anyone had yet imagined. In a narrow alleyway behind the theater, Manning interviewed a jittery stagehand whose hands trembled as he recounted the volunteer's disappearance. The stagehand's words were disjointed, laden with a haunted quality, as if speaking of something he'd seen only in fleeting, unimaginable moments. He described a secret passage beneath the stage, dimly lit and lined with symbols that defied explanation, an echo of clandestine gatherings and long-forgotten rituals. Meanwhile, Lena Reyes retraced her steps backstage, her eyes scanning for clues among scattered props and abandoned costumes. She discovered a scrap of paper tucked near the ancient trunk, a set of coordinates scribbled in hurried, almost illegible handwriting. Along with the note was a cryptic message that spoke of the final act and truths that blur the line between art and atrocity. Lena's pulse quickened as she realized that this was not just an isolated vanishing trick. It was the culmination of a far-reaching conspiracy. Corvin, alone in the dim backstage room, allowed his thoughts to wander to the years that had led him here. Once, he had believed in the transformative power of illusion, the idea that magic could reveal hidden truths. But that belief had withered under the weight of his own dark deeds. His career had been built upon subtle manipulations, elegant diversions that masked the unethical acts committed in the name of art. To a few discerning minds, including Manning's and Lena's, it was clear that Corvin wasn't merely an entertainer. He was a participant in a game with higher stakes, a game orchestrated by a shadowy collective, whose roots spread deep into the underbelly of society. Days later, in a bleak industrial district on the city's fringe, Manning tracked down an abandoned warehouse that matched the coordinates Lena had found. The building exuded decay. Its metal walls were splattered with graffiti and scars of time. Here, the lines between the performance and a real, morally corrupt operation began to blur. Manning's flashlight revealed remnants of electronic equipment, piles of documents, and the unmistakable scent of chemicals that hinted at scientific experiments conducted in secrecy. In a secluded room within the warehouse, a cluster of hooded figures sat around a table littered with sketches, blueprints, and encrypted files. Among them was a person known only as the Curator, a figure reputed to manage the operations of an underground network dedicated to extreme psychological experiments. Their aim was cryptic: to study the limits of human perception and fear by orchestrating situations where life and art collided. It was a modern cult of psychological alchemy, treating human subjects as both canvas and experiment. Corvin's final act was not simply a farewell performance. It was meant to be a live experiment, the climax of their sinister research. Back at the Paragon Theater, a restless night settled in as the city's storm continued its relentless drumming on the roof of empty cars and abandoned storefronts. Lena, driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, found herself torn between exposing the truth and protecting those unwitting victims who might be caught in the crossfire. She had interviewed several locals: a bartender with haunted eyes, a taxi driver whose voice trembled as he recounted mysterious disappearances that painted an unsettling mosaic of interconnected horrors across the city. As Lena pieced together the threads of evidence, she realized that Corvin had been manipulated. His artistry and illusions were no longer solely his own. They had become the instruments of a shadowy experiment. Every trick, every disappearance during his shows served as a signal that the network was gathering human subjects for a nightmarish trial by fear and control. The night of Corvin's final performance arrived with a sense of inevitability. The theater, now under heightened security after reports of previous vanishing acts, was both a fortress and a trap. News had trickled out about the strange occurrences, adding an electric charge to the atmosphere. Manning and Lena, following their own parallel investigations, converged at the venue. They shared furtive glances in the crowded foyer, their paths destined to intersect. On stage, under a stark, single spotlight, Corvin began his final act with the same precision that had defined his entire career. However, tonight's performance carried an air of desperation, a soul laid bare before an audience that wasn't entirely complicit in its own entertainment. In a series of intricate illusions, he mimicked a descent into madness, each act more intricate and unnerving than the last. His gestures were exaggerated but sincere, every flicker of his eyes, every trembling hand movement betrayed a man who had long been wrestling with his own inner demons. The final illusion was set to be the grand reveal, a masterful demonstration that would blend reality and art in an irreversible way. As he prepared, Manning watched from the wings, his instincts screaming that the act was larger than a mere performance. Lena, hidden among the last rows of the audience, clutched her camera and notebook, determined to capture every detail. The stage was transformed into an eerie labyrinth, with smoke machines and fog machines casting ghostly forms across the creaking wooden floor. The ancient trunk sat prominently at the center, its lid slightly ajar. Corvin delivered his closing lines in a voice that resonated with both sorrow and resolve. Tonight, you see the ultimate truth, that our deepest fears are not illusions, but parts of ourselves we dare not confront. With that, he gestured to an unseen mechanism, and the trunk creaked open as if on cue. A gust of cold air spilled forth, carrying with it the echo of distant, anguished whispers. For a split second, time seemed to slow, a heartbeat in the dark, before the stage plunged into near-total darkness. Murmurs swept through the audience as the lights struggled back, revealing an empty stage. The volunteers, along with the mysterious stagehand who had witnessed the hidden passage, were nowhere to be seen. Panic simmered beneath the veneer of sophistication, and the theater staff moved swiftly to secure the exits. Manning rushed to the stage, his mind racing. Had Corvin orchestrated another illusion? Or was this the culmination of the chilling conspiracy? In the backstage chaos, Lena discovered a hidden door behind a velvet curtain. It led down a narrow staircase into a subterranean chamber lit by the sickly glow of industrial lamps. There, scattered on a table, were files and photographs, dossiers on the missing individuals, diagrams outlining psychological experiments, and evidence of clandestine meetings between Corvin and members of the underground network. One file, in particular, caught her eye, labeled Project Delirium. Its contents detailed a series of experiments involving sensory overload, human subject research, and the deliberate manipulation of fear. It explained the true nature of Corvin's final act, an experiment that blurred the boundaries between his carefully constructed illusions and the harsh reality of exploitation and control. At that moment, Manning burst into the chamber, his eyes dark and determined. "It was never about the magic," he said grimly, scanning the documents with a practiced eye. "It was about feeding a system that uses fear to control. And tonight, we've witnessed just a taste of that nightmare." His words reverberated against the cold concrete walls, adding another layer of grim understanding to the unfolding mystery. Corvin's whereabouts were still unknown. As an investigation ensued, the remaining traces of evidence pointed to a complex intertwining of his past transgressions and the ongoing experiments conducted by the clandestine collective. In late-night interviews and whispered conversations, witnesses recalled the subtle hints of coercion in Corvin's behavior, a man cornered by his own guilt and the heavy burden of responsibility. Was he an unwilling pawn in a larger game, or had he willingly embraced the darkness in pursuit of artistic grandeur? Lena's article, published in a series of investigative reports, unveiled the horrifying truth to the public. The narrative was not one of a solitary madman, but of a corrupt system exploiting both the vulnerable and the talented for its own twisted ends. In her final words, she wrote, "In the labyrinth of deceit, where art becomes the instrument of cruelty, the illusionist's last act isn't the end. It's the beginning of a deeper, more pervasive horror." Months later, in the quiet aftermath, as authorities continued to pursue leads and dismantle the underground network, a solitary figure was seen walking down a deserted street. In the dim light of a flickering lamppost, Edmund Corvin's face was barely visible. a mask of resignation and remorse. Whether he had orchestrated his disappearance as his final masterpiece or had become yet another victim of the shadowy experiment remained a mystery. His legacy, tainted by beauty and horror intertwined, left the world pondering the true nature of fear, and the extent to which reality can be manipulated by those who dare to wield the power of illusion. In the echo of that night at the Paragon Theater, the last act of A Troubled Man became a cautionary tale. It was a story of human frailty and the dangerous allure of power, a reminder that sometimes the greatest trick is not in deceiving the eyes, but in deluding the mind. The stage was empty, but the question lingered. In a world where nothing is as it seems, what price are we willing to pay for the thrill of the unknown? And so, as the rain continued to wash the city's sins into dark alleyways, the truth remained obscured, like the final elusive illusion. A truth that dared to challenge the very fabric of reality, leaving behind whispers of a conspiracy that would haunt the annals of modern crime forever.